much for your patience with our technical difficulties. I don't know why there's always something, but we're happy to have you all here this morning. My name is Kathy Seidel. I am the new branch manager for Special Collections, and I'm absolutely delighted to be here. I guess it's going on 3 months already. I can't believe it. There's so much to learn in this building. I want to start by thanking our partners in this endeavor, Historical Albuquerque, Inc., and Oasis, and of course we always thank our friends for the public library, and if you are interested in joining. I am so pleased to be able to welcome Nancy Tucker here for her third installment on Postcards, the golden age of postcards in Albuquerque, 1900 to 1920, part 3 you can see here. And Nancy has always been interested in history and design. She first collected postcards as a child and then again after college. She was really bitten by the bug about 17 years ago, she says, when she browsed eBay for the first time and found a postcard of an Albuquerque tuberculosis sanatorium. And said to herself, wow, I didn't know that existed. So let's see what we can learn through postcards. I think it's a fascinating way to approach the history. She estimates that she looks at 10,000 images a week in her hunt for postcards and other Albuquerqueana. So please join me in welcoming Nancy Tucker.
Let's see if this mic is working.
Yeah.
Oh, good. Okay, I want to first of all offer a PS to my first presentation about postcards. I talked about kind of a scandal that happened in Albuquerque where one of the photographer postcard publishers received some stolen property that was stolen from another photographer postcard publisher in Albuquerque. Samuel B. Feitz was put on trial for having received this piece of camera equipment, and that was stolen from a fellow by the name of Milton Porter. Anyway, subsequent to my last presentation, presentation number 2, where I also talked about these two men, I found out that Mr. Feitz, whose real name was Fite, F-I-T-E, was an African-American gentleman. And I just wanted to add that for the record because we did not previously know that any African Americans had photography businesses here in Albuquerque. I learned this via a researcher at UNM who had been contacted by somebody in Kentucky who was researching this Mr. Fite, F-I-T-E, which is his actual name. So I just wanted to put that as a PS for everybody. Okay. We're going to do us some history today. I don't know which direction to point this. This is probably the Hyde Exploring Expedition store on South 1st Street in about 1902. This young gentleman here, Scoop, you might guess from his name Scoop that he was a reporter. Chalmers Pancoast actually was more than a reporter. He reported from newspapers all around the country. And when he died at about age 84, he was on his 34th book, just about to publish that. And here he is. He spent time at all 3 of the newspapers in Albuquerque in the period of about 1902 to 1905. And here he is in what was a very typical sort of Indian trading post, but in the heart of Albuquerque. And you can see here the canned goods, and here are the Indian gents who are there to trade their goods for canned goods. And I guess he was leisurely perusing the scene. I'm talking about Hyde Exploring Expedition because it sort of kicks off the segment of this presentation on the Curio stores. Because although Hyde did not itself issue any postcards, they were the predecessors to the Benham trading company, which did issue a postcard. And this right here is the Benham Trading Company, and they are catty-cornered to the Alvarado downtown. They're right there at First, northwest corner of First and Central. The Benhams bought out the Hyde exploring expedition, which had been funded by two brothers named Hyde to excavate Pueblo Bonito and bring back trophies for the Museum of Natural History in New York. And they were led by a fellow by the name of Wetherill, who was a self-taught archaeologist and sounds like something of a pot hunter. Anyway, Mr. J.W. Benham was the son of a Benham who had a store in Los Angeles. And so young Mr. Benham and friends who had been on the Hyde exploring expedition started up this store and took over basically all of the stock of the Benham Trading Company, about the Hyde Exploration Company. Hyde is given credit for introducing Navajo rugs to the Anglo population of America and sort of popularizing it. So Benham had this store and a good location right across from the train station, so they got lots of tourists. Young Mr. Benham took over the Hyde Company in 1903, moved from where you saw Chalmers Pancoast, that store, up to this location, and started advertising their goods. And one of the things that they started advertising about 1904 is souvenir postals, which are postcards to us, and postcard albums. They advertised this thing, as they said, in 1904, which may be the first indication of the postcard hobby in Albuquerque and the first advertising of postcards, 1904 in Albuquerque. One of the people who worked for the Benham Company and had been on the Hyde exploring expedition was a young man by the name of John Lee Clarke and his brother Howard. And eventually John Lee became manager of this store. He instituted what they called a leather department and a button department. The leather department made things like this, which is, you've probably seen them, postcard albums or photograph albums. And the button department, I am wearing one of John Lee Clarke's buttons that you will see in a slide. So he expanded what the store was doing beyond Indian goods to tourist goods, really. In 1908, young Mr. Benham sold his interest in the store to John Lee Clarke and his brother, and A.B. McGaffey. And in doing that, the store entirely became an Albuquerque-based operation. It was no longer a branch store of the Los Angeles store. John Lee, when he came to Albuquerque, let me go on with Benham. This is some Benham advertising, and I want you to notice, this is the sign of the Indian horse. That's a horse, not a dog. And notice the trademark. You will see this again and again in this presentation, but here's some of his early advertising for Benham's. And here's the postcard. It's actually not a postcard, a single postcard, but what we call a folder, which is an accordion folder of images. And you can look at this later if you want. It folds up and becomes just a mailer. For 2 cents, you can send all of these images to your friends back home. These are some of the images that are inside that mailer. Here's the message. We are having the time of our lives here with the Indians and Mexicans. It was exotic for the people from back east. Here's again that image. And this is, I believe, probably Laguna, Pueblo, here. Cuning Castle. And what was known as the birthplace of Mrs. Phil Sheridan, as in Phil Sheridan, the Civil War general, but was not really the birthplace of Mrs. Phil Sheridan. It was the birthplace of her sister. Okay, John Lee Clarke. John Lee, when he came to Albuquerque in 1902, was known as a most pleasant gentleman. They made these, he was big in the Elks Club, and this is the pin that I am wearing when John Lee ran for the Grand Inner Guard of the Elks Club at their convention in Seattle in 1912. I don't know how the title Grand Inner Guard translates to president, vice president, but it was one of the big poobahs of the Elks nationally. And this is the kind of thing that they made there at the John Lee Clarke store. It's probably not woven by Navajos, but they made 1,500 of these things for the Albuquerque Elks to take out to Seattle. The local newspaper titled this "Catchy Badges for the Antlered Ones." So all of the Albuquerque men wore these, and they bought enough to kind of hand out, and they were a choice souvenir. John Lee was quite a promoter. When he took over the Benham store, he made sure that when there was an occasion in town, like when the Mother Superior of the Daughters of Charity came through, and the girls at St. Vincent's wanted to have a pageant, he lent the girls costume materials out of the store to dress them up, and of course made sure that it was mentioned in the newspaper as well. He changed the name of the store to John Lee Clarke in February of 1908. He was the chairman of the store, and his brother Howard was the secretary of the store. Howard was a younger brother, and he did a lot of the traveling out to the Navajo Nation and to the Pueblos to acquire goods. To raise money to buy out the Benhams, they put everything in the store on sale, and prices were reduced by 1/3 for 10 days. John Lee had big plans. He was going to open a branch in Seattle, and he hired himself a couple of salesmen to go on the road to peddle his various wares, not just the Indian stuff, but also the badges and the tourist tchotchkes. He got some good clients from this publicity. He was the exclusive purveyor of certain leather goods to Marshall Fields in Chicago, for instance. He also was something of a polymath. He, in addition to being quite a promoter, he wrote the words to a very successful song called Bible Stories. His big regret about it, when he found out that the people who published the music to it had sold 10,000 copies, he had sold away his interest in the words to this, his rights to the song for just a few dollars. He had a poem published in a magazine. He may have been an architect because he came up with some drawings for an annex to the Elks building. And he patented an axe wedge that would hold the head on things like axes and hammers and things like that. He was offered a lot of money for the patent on that one, but learned his lesson with the song and didn't sell it on. He also got involved a lot in various kinds of activities here in Albuquerque. He was in the Elks, of course, the Good Roads group. He was on the city commission at one point. He made the official badges for the trade excursions, which I had talked about the last time. He even threw what's the Pueblo people call a grab day during the Irrigation Congress. He took over this building. This building. It doesn't say John Lee Clarke. It still says Benhams. But a grab day is when people who are feeling pretty wealthy go to the roof of their building and throw stuff off the building, the top of the building, to other members of the community. And during the irrigation Congress time, John Lee had a grab day when he threw $50 to $100 worth of goods off the roof of his store to the crowds waiting below. Quite a different kind of publicity pitch. He did a lot of advertising for the shop of the Indian horse. How would you like to buy a Navajo rug these days at $1 a pound? I sure would like to do that. He sometimes placed 2 and even 3 ads in the newspaper each day. And he often did these round ads because they stuck out among all of the rectangular and square ads in the newspaper. You could really see where John Lee's his advertising was. He had a stand outside this store. We don't see it here, but he advertised in 1910 he wanted a bright boy, 12 to 15 years old, who would tend his postcard stand. He didn't publish any cards himself. I mean, there are no cards that, Pretty View of Albuquerque, published by John Lee Clarke. What he did is he took other people's cards and he put his imprint on them, or he sold postcards by other publishers. And I'll show you some of those. These are cards I found, when I first saw them, I found it hard to believe they were not modern cards because they were done in a watercolor style that I found very contemporary. These came out in 1908. They were attributed to Ira D. Cassidy, but later he changed his name to Gerald Cassidy, which is part of his actual name. He was Ira D. Gerald Cassidy. And under the name Gerald Cassidy, he became quite a famous Western artist. But these are just, I think, exquisite cards. And so different from the kind of cards that were being published those days. Here's another 3 cards from that series. They were actually printed by a company up in Denver, where Cassidy was living at that time. And Cassidy himself was a lithographer and may have had something to do with the actual printing of these cards. These are more typical John Lee Clarke cards. He's taken a card actually made by the M. Writer Company of Los Angeles, and on the back of the card he puts his imprint. It says, "The day of indolence and Indians is past. We have before us the day of planters and prosperity." And there's his sign of the Indian horse. And he sent out a lot of postcards to do advertising locally. Here's a view. And this is what we in the postcard world call the damn family cards, where you have these caricatures of various people, including here the dog. And this is the whole damn family. Lizzie Dam, Annie Dam, Miss U.B. Dam herself is the mother. Mr. I.B. Dam, Billy B. Dam, Baby Dam, and the damn dog. But again, he's taken somebody else's card and just put an imprint on it. Here, send this card at 12 cents in stamps, and we will send you a full set of Albuquerque postcards in full colors. 20 cents in stamps, and you get 16 interesting Indian postcards in pastel colorings, which might well have been the Gerald Cassidy cards. And if you send 50 cents in stamps, they'll send you a set of 39 postcards of New Mexico, all in colors. All right, let's talk a little bit more about John Lee. Elks in Albuquerque was a huge deal. When John Lee went to the convention in Seattle in 1912, Albuquerque's population was roughly maybe 12,000, 10 to 12,000. The membership of the Elks Club in Albuquerque was 818 that year. So you chop that 12,000 in half by women and men, say 6,000 men. Chop that in half, children and adults. 3,000 out of 3,000 maybe male adults. You know, almost a third of them were members of the Elks Club. That was absolutely huge. Let's see. Let's go on to Wrights. Charles Wright was born in Missouri. His father was English, his mother was Canadian. And this is the image that most people think of for Wright's Indian Building. It was the showplace of the West. And Mr. Wright and Mr. Morgan incorporated themselves as architects and consultants in designing in the Pueblo style for professional and residential buildings. I don't know that they got an awful lot of business doing that, but this, which I cribbed off of eBay, you can tell because somebody watermarked it. It was actually the first building that Wright had that was trying to replicate the Pueblo style. He had one or two buildings. This is at 3rd and Gold. He had two other buildings prior on Gold that were trading posts. But here he began to really build things up. There's a totem pole here, a very New Mexican totem pole. And he called the store El Curio, Wright's trading post. This probably is Mr. Wright. As I showed in the last presentation that I did, the Baladabia Shriners had what they called their Indian patrol of Anglo men who dressed up as Indians and did probably more or less authentic Indian dances for the entertainment of other elks. And here, Eagle Dance by Chief White Eagle, C.A. Wright, Charles A. Wright. And I'm presuming that the Chief White Eagle is the guy in the white feathers. And the Sub-Chief Brown Eagle, Juan, who doesn't rate a last name, is the guy in the brown feathers here. This is the logo that was above that store, which I am not real familiar with Indian iconography, but might possibly be a frog. I don't know. He's got a snake in his mouth. Does anybody know what the logo is? I think that Wright was trying to make this logo as popular as the logo of Knife Wing that was over the door of the Fred Harvey Indian Building at the Alvarado. But he put it on a lot of materials early on. Go back up a couple of places, and this is the same logo right there over the door. But this is a folder of postcards like the one I showed you before. This was a real popular way. Collectors today don't like folders very much, but I like them because they have interesting images in them sometimes. This is a freestanding postcard of the interior of Wright's building. You see the piles of rugs, a couple of showcases full of silver and the like. You can see the swastikas on the rugs because, of course, this was prior to World War II. And then these are images from inside that folder. A better image, a better picture showing you the silver here. And this is probably colcha handwork, Mexican colcha work, and probably some miscellaneous lace and the like. And here you see that they even had a fireplace in the back. And he got his poor Indian workmen to pose huddling around the fireplace. Here's the outside of that building. And looky here. It's the same logo that was on that Benham's trading post. He took even the trademark line. So it appeared for 3 different stores that day, the sign of the Indian horse. Okay, we're going to switch now out of the curio dealers to the book and stationery dealers. Samuel Newcomer was born in Mississippi, and he and his wife came here in 1883 when he was about 30. And he set up shop, having bought out a successor company. That was a popular way to set up shop here. Somebody was going bankrupt and you bought all their goods, and bingo, you were in business. They came in 1893, as I said. He sold books, periodicals, stationery, typewriter supplies, office supplies, sporting goods, confectionery, cigars, bicycles, and sundries. So although you were a stationery store, you sold an awful lot of other things. You were kind of like a mini department store almost. He did a lot of trade by mail, Texas and Arizona. He also liked to frame things. And this is another image I cribbed off of eBay. This is a hand-painted photograph, again, probably of Laguna. And this is his backplate, which also served as his mailing label. It says, "Contents merchandise, 4th class market, open for postal inspection if necessary." This is on the back of this picture. But it talks about what he sold: pictures, picture frames, framing a specialty, fabric paintings, art needlework, greeting cards, clay moldings. Thank you. So they did a lot of different things in order to keep going. These are some of the very nice postcards that Newcomer published. This is 2nd Street. This is what they call the wholesale district, which is, of course, the rail yards. That's 1st Street along here. I don't know where he had these printed. This is 2nd Street again. This is 2nd Street looking south. There's the White Elephant, infamous bar, and the Barnett Building here. This is the First Methodist Church and the Presbyterian Church. Now, Mr. Newcomer seems to have been a guy who wanted to sell a lot of different things but didn't do a very good job of it, because in about 1907 he went bankrupt and picked up some work as a U.S. Marshal. You read reports of him escorting somebody to Fort Leavenworth, or some Chinese people to San Francisco for deportation. His wife started working in the library, which would have been on this site. But after a couple of years, they went back into business as the art shop, doing picture framing, which he enjoyed, and fancy work materials, coats, suits, and dresses. And it seems, from reading the reports about them, that Mrs. Newcomer, Mary Newcomer, discovered that she had a gift for selling things. And in the later years of their second company, the art shop, people referred to Mrs. Newcomer's store. They no longer referred to Mr. Newcomer. And she expanded her appeal by offering embroidery classes to adults and to children. She would have the traveling corset ladies, the women who travel the country selling corsets, make a stop at the art shop to show off the corsetry. And their hiatus of about 2 years seemed to have done them some real good. I noticed today that this thing here in back of me, let me point it out. was a gift to the library from the Tuesday Literary Club. Well, Mrs. was a member of the Tuesday Literary Club. And after Mr. died, Mrs. continued selling clothing and other sorts of things. And possibly this card. It doesn't have a date on it. It says it's published by The Art Mart, which for my money is pretty close to The Art Shop. I was unable to find any information about a company called The Art Mart in Albuquerque, and the back of the card specifically says it's Albuquerque. So I'm thinking that The Art Mart is the art store, and that this was a product of the Newcomers. Okay, Ole Matson. He was a huge factor in Albuquerque postcard publishing and a lot of other things. Here's a young picture of Mr. Matson, and older and a little bit crustier. He was known as Ollie, although his name was Orville. He came to Albuquerque in about 1898, set up in the Armijo building on Central Avenue downtown, again having purchased the inventory of a defunct predecessor. The predecessor stole stationery, but Ollie immediately ordered cigars, I wonder why, and smoking goods. Within 2 years, he was doing ticket bookings. If you wanted to see an event in town, you came to Ole Matson's to buy a ticket to it. He moved to a little bit further west on Railroad Avenue at 205 Railroad Avenue. And by 1904, he was actually doing theatrical bookings. He was the manager of the Elks Opera House, managed the theater and booked the acts that came to the Elks Opera House. He too was one to expand his trade beyond stationery and cigars, and he added school books, school supplies, Kodaks and photographic supplies, fine stationery, and candy. He also later did photographic printing for amateurs. Here is Matson's store on a postcard, Ole Matson and Company. There's a bigger image of it. In the Barnett building, which is at 2nd Central. This is Central. Then this is 2nd. Beautiful. And he was a beautiful storefront, and he was known for having a lot of exhibits in those plate glass storefront. And he had a really good location because he was right next door to the San Jose Market, which was a popular grocery store of the time. In later years, Matson arranged that the bus for the university would stop right in front of his store. So all of the kids who lived in town and went to the university would come down to Matson's and board in the morning and come back at night, and then they would hang around Matson's store. So he became very popular with the university set. These guys knew a thing or two or three or four about marketing, I'll tell you. You could eat, once he was elected city treasurer, you could even pay your taxes at his store. He did book rentals, and in 1918, when his wife became involved in the Red Cross, you could even buy your Red Cross membership at the Matson store. Let's look at a couple of their interior of the store here. I apologize for the lousy condition, but see, there's a pennant that says New Mexico. All kinds of, looks like China there. And this is an unusual kind of card, postcard folder, mailer thingy. It's very elaborate how it folds out. And then there are all of the images. So this here is what you're seeing up there. This was originally published by a firm in Cincinnati called the Tom Jones Company in 1905, and Matson managed to get himself as the sole distributor of that little folder in Albuquerque. This is the residence of W.W. Strong, which I think is at about 8th and Central at that park whose name I always forget.
Robinson.
Thank you, Robinson Park. These are the 4 elementary schools in the city, 1st, 2nd, 3rd, and 4th Ward schools. And then he did real postcards by 1907 or thereabouts. St. Joseph Sanitarium. This is the high school, the original high school in Albuquerque. I love the contrast in this. Here's how us elegant Anglo people are living, and here's how the poor Hispanics are living. It says suburban residents, might be Martinez Town, might have been Old Town or something. As I said, he did printing for amateur photographers. This is apparently some sort of athletic event out at the university. You can see the mountain there in the background. And this is the back print that his company put on this 1916 postcard. School supplies, books and stationery, Kodaks and photo supplies, sporting goods of all kinds. What is that word? Arms and ammunition. Yeah, he was big into the local gun club. And so they went far beyond their original mandates of selling stuff. These are some later cards, really beautifully printed. There's Robinson Park right there, and that might be, this one might be that Strong residence. The YMCA building was sort of catty-cornered to the Alvarado on 1st Street. He did series of cards. They had a series on the Alvarado Hotel and a series on the State University of New Mexico, which as they sometimes imprinted they seem to be watering the grass right there. And this is the sundial at the university. Okay, so Matson stayed in business for a long time, but by 1930, the Depression, he went bankrupt. And I want to read you the 1-paragraph story that appeared in the journal when the Matson Company, which had been going now for 32 years, closed. Ole Matson Company Stationers, 206 West Central Avenue, closed its doors about 5 o'clock Tuesday evening. This was published on Wednesday. It is understood a petition in bankruptcy will be filed Wednesday. The Matson store is one of the oldest in the city. Ole Matson has long been a prominent businessman here. He is a former state treasurer. And then just 1 paragraph to summarize 32 years in his business. I found that very sad. He did manage to do a couple of things after bankruptcy. He was an insurance agent and did some other things, but basically it eased him into his retirement. He's one of those interesting Albuquerque guys about whom a whole book could be written. John Lee Clarke, others deserve their whole books. E.J. Strong was probably Matson's direct competitor. Here's an interior of his store. And Strong really used postcards to distinguish his business. You can see in this picture, this might be a postcard rack. I'm not sure. But this definitely is a postcard rack here. There are postcards here. These might be postcards. He bragged in his advertising that he carried 400 different postcards at any one time. And at a time when the postcard hobby was humongous, that was a big way of getting people to come to your store. You have 400 different kinds of cards. Strong, Edward Jefferson Strong, arrived in Albuquerque in 1907 from the east. He came from Philadelphia as a lumber, although he was born in West Virginia. And you remember Mr. Newcomer. He purchased Newcomer's stock when Newcomer went bankrupt. He opened a store in the old location. Come on in, you can sit down if you want. In the Newcomer's old location, which was at 2nd and Silver, right next to the post office. Again, a very good retail location because there was a lot of traffic at the post office. To fund his purchase of Newcomers, he did a clean-out / bankruptcy sale of all of Newcomer's old merchandise at 25 to 75% off everything in the store. In 1908, he had expanded his trade to include sheet music and started advertising these 400 variety of postcards. He was the local source for postcards by Raphael Tuck, who were the art publishers to the King and Queen of England. Tuck was a huge source of postcard images around the world. But bookstore, but he also sold hammocks, picture frames, croquet sets, baseball nets, razors and strops, Navajo blankets, model trains, toys, magic lanterns, and even something called a postcard projector, which was a camera that enlarged a postcard image and projected it onto the wall. He also did a lot of advertising. Let me read you a poem that he used as an advertisement, or part of a poem. It went on and on, but I won't read all of it. Friends, New Mexicans, and Albuquerqueans lent me your ears. I will return them this afternoon. I came not here to do you up, but to give you the best of values. The good that men do lives after them in the shape of real estate, bonds, and life insurance. The evil inter with their bones, so let it be with all of us. I may be accused of cutting prices. If so, it were a grievous fault, and grievously I may be lambasted for it. Here, under leave of you, I come and submit my goods, quality, prices, and all. If these will not your approval meet, then I, like Caesar, before my competitors will fall. Here's one of the things that he sold. They call this a postcard machine. It's actually a camera. But by the time this ad was published, cameras became best known for making images that you could make into your own postcards. Strong's did promotional postcards. This book was published in 1915, so they sent out a postcard letting you know that the book was now available at the store. And this is a somewhat later card, probably when Strong was no longer associated with the company, but they kept the company name. They had a rental library, and this was the sign of the Strong Borough. So not only did we have the Indian horse, but we had the sign of the Strong Borough. Here's a little envelope that they had specially made up to put your postcards in once you bought them. And these are some of the early ones. They're pretty muddy, which not well printed, which makes me think they may have been done locally. You can see the volcanoes out here. This one is practically indecipherable. It's supposed to be Bear Canyon. This is a better one of Bear Canyon. It was a very popular place at the time to go out and catch the cool breezes. These are some much better ones. This is Whitcomb Springs into Harris Canyon. A little resort. People from the city would go out there and spend a week or two. The National Guard Armory. And after Mr. Strong retired, he sold, the company was sold a couple of different times, but always kept the name Strong's Bookstore. So these are some later cards that were published by successors to Mr. Strong. These are what we call white border cards because of the white border around them. And there's a white border around them because most postcards in the early 19-teens were printed in Germany because they had the world's best printers there. But after World War I started, the German printers were no longer available to Americans, of course. So Americans started printing their own postcards. And in order to save money on ink, they put this white border around. So you're saving a fraction of the ink that would have been used on the cards themselves. So you can date cards to some extent by these white borders. This is an even later card, although it has a white border. It's not a traditional white border card. You can barely see it, but there's a linen imprint in there, which is not real linen fabric, but we call them linen cards. And again, you can date a card by that linen imprint. Okay, next company, Albright and Anderson. This company would rate a book just because there were so many scandals associated with it. One son married his stepsister, and then they divorced, and then he became an alcoholic, and he killed himself, you know, by exhausting his car in the garage. But the whole company, and you may have seen this if you use the city directories, this is a print you often see in the city directories. Mr. Albright was the elder of the two in this partnership. He was born in Ohio and originally came to Santa Fe in about 1880 and then moved down to Albuquerque in 82. He worked on a newspaper. He was on the school board, elected to the territorial council, so he was a big hoorah. Mr. Anderson, that's Ward D. Anderson, he was born in Colorado. He came to Albuquerque with his parents when he was only 5 years old. He too was in the newspaper business, was a carrier for the Albuquerque Morning Journal. He married Ward Anderson married George Albright's daughter, Ione. So these two went into business as father-in-law and son-in-law in 1907, having bought a bankrupt company, of course. In this case, it was the Sellers Printing Company. That's Colonel D.K.B. Sellers, another guy who rates a book. They were general line printers. They did newspapers, invitation, engraved cards, Christmas cards, and postcards. There's a little scandal that they were involved in. The Santa Fe New Mexican long had the contract to print state documents. But Albright and Anderson contested the contract and won the contract at half the price that the New Mexican had been charging. But it turned out that Albright and Anderson had cheated too because they paid off 3 other printing firms in Albuquerque to let them contest the New Mexican for that contract. Albright and Anderson printed the Albuquerque High School yearbook. And in 1916, Ward Anderson became the sole owner of the company. Now these are some of their early postcards. They're not really very nice, and I wish I had dates on them, but these were not mailed, so there are no dates. This is a Sleda Indian dance, 12 miles from Wright's trading post, dealer in Navajo rugs, antiques, and curios. This is an odd card because it advertises Wright's trading post, but the mark on the back said that it was printed by Albright and Anderson and published by Albright and Anderson. So you don't know who quite really was the publisher of this. Was it Wright's or was it Albright and Anderson? This is Indian Bells, B-E-L-L-E-S, in dance costume. Again, it's probably his lab. Here's the entrance to Wright's. It's a freestanding postcard of an image that we saw earlier. This is a person. It took me a while before I realized what this is here. It's a man. There's his legs. You can see his legs. You can see his head. And he's totally loaded down with bags of stuff. This is probably a group of Mexican women doing colcha embroidery because that was a popular thing to be sold in these stores as well. I'm going to give you a chance to, I'll read this too. It was postmarked 1914, and here's the publisher's mark down here, Albright and Anderson Public Printers in Albuquerque. It's a New Mexico Christmas card. It says, "In New Mexico Christmas, my holly is the chili pod upon the wall displayed. My Christmas trees are mountain pines in glittering what is that word? What?
Something to do with glittering decks?
Deals are way. My candles are 1,000 stars in God's eternal skies. My songs, the distant whisperings that from the woods arise. My dearest Christmas gift tonight is the love of those I love, which east or west or anywhere is Christmas gift enough." And it's unusual to see a Christmas card, a Christmas postcard that's a local card. Usually they had Santa Clauses on them or angels or something like this. But this is quite unusual. And these are not terribly rare. You don't see them all over the place, but I've had half a dozen of them pass through my hands over the years. This is another card that they did for local stuff. This is the interior of the Elks Club. And you can see the elk over the fireplace.
The antlered one.
The antlered one, yes. This is the ladies' rest room where you would rest by loosening the stays on that corset that he would have been sold by Mrs. Newcomer. This is the lounging room. This is the reading room and another lounging room. The Elks are very interesting as an organization because their clubhouses usually had bedrooms, I'll call them, rooms that you could rent. So a traveling elk could stay at the Elks Club instead of staying at a hotel. So they sort of ran a hotel chain in some ways. Now, Mr. Anderson, the son-in-law, took over from his father-in-law in 1916. He established the Albuquerque Daily Democrat newspaper, which absorbed the plant, but it seems not to have been to his taste, and in 1919, he sold the company to the Valiants, father and son, G.E. and G.S. Valiant, who had formerly owned the Albuquerque Evening Herald. Everybody gets involved in the newspaper business. It's very difficult to keep track of. And Anderson went on the road. He became a salesman for a Denver paper company, but ended up on the West Coast for about 10 years, where in Long Beach he got together with another former Albuquerque printer by the name of H.S. Lithgow, and they established a printing company. But in 1928, he came back to Albuquerque. He and his wife, new wife, not Ione that he had married before, but a different wife, came back to Albuquerque. And Mrs. Ward Anderson, the editor and perpetuator of the Monday Morning Blog, put out this publicity card. But it's not a true postcard, it's really a postal card, a government postal card with their printed back. And when Anderson came back, he established the Southwestern Printing Company, literally across the street from the Valiant Printing Company that he had owned 10 years before. Not a very nice thing for him to do. He incorporated as the Ward Anderson Printing Company a little bit later on, and the company continued into the 50s, printing cards like these. This is Jones Motor Company. Another of Jones Motor Company, Lomas at San Mateo. And this is Gallus Motors, which looks to be like on Lomas, I think. Central
University.
Oh, that's right, yeah, because there's the church. Okay, now our last guy is William E. Bauer. This is another sad story. He was a pharmacist and probably a pretty decent guy. He came to he was born in Canada. His parents were German. And he immigrated to the U.S. in 1896. And after having spent some time in Costa Rica, he arrived in Albuquerque in about 1903, 4, something like that. He ran the Alvarado Pharmacy he worked a couple of jobs at a couple of places and eventually bought into the Alvarado Pharmacy, which was at first in gold and not really associated with the Alvarado, but was close enough. He was one of the young businessmen of the city. And at about age 38, the same week that Clyde and Carrie Tingley got married, he married a lady who then died within 3 years, leaving a young son. Now, during the time that Bauer had the Alvarado Pharmacy, he did advertising. He was one of the first to do trading stamps. He even offered double stamps. I like that. He did mail orders. He did phone orders. This was all before his wife died. And he started doing postcards. I think that probably the postcards aroused out of his interest in cameras. It was a way of distinguishing himself. Here again is the old shibboleth of the General Sheridan House. Had nothing to do with General Sheridan, except that his wife's sister was born there. Publishing his own postcards was a way of distinguishing himself in business. Other pharmacies apparently did not publish postcards, so if you wanted one and you were close to the Alvarado, it was a good place to get cards. He did some nice looking cards. I love this one. And you can barely see, published by W.E. Bauer, Albuquerque, and Mex. Right there. He never stamped stuff his information on the back. He always hid it somewhere down here in the front. Anyway, the wife died, and he took that little son, 3 years old, up to his relatives in Canada, who raised him for a couple of years. And then brought him back to Albuquerque in 1917. And from what I can see, the death of his wife and the advent of his young son in his life kind of messed up his life. He sold his interest. He had taken on a partner in the pharmacy, but by 1925, he started working as a pharmacist in other stores other than his own. And this was before the Depression. So something happened that he just could not keep things going very well. He worked at the Butt Drug Company, and he worked at the Albuquerque Pharmacy. He worked at the Apple Pharmacy. And by 1934, he was dead. He was buried in Sunset Memorial Park. And the saddest thing is that he was not even buried next to his wife, who was buried in a separate cemetery in Albuquerque. So, another of his cards. That's the old churches at Isleta. And I'm just mentioning Ilfeld because he was such a powerhouse in Albuquerque. The Ilfelds were the wholesalers of everything as they advertised themselves. This is Charles Ilfeld, one of the brothers, and this is the Charles Ilfeld Company building, which was on North 1st Street. You can see it's in the process of being torn down. What was that, the 50s, maybe the 60s? 70s. 70s, okay, thank you for the knowledge of cars, because I don't have any. They did not publish postcards, but they distributed postcards. And this is the two pieces of a box that postcards came in. They made sure that you knew who you got them from. And it's a trip around the world in postcards. 50 to the set, all different price, 30 cents for 50 postcards. Or you could buy, since he was a wholesaler, you could buy a dozen of these boxes of cards for $3. And these are some of the cards that you would see. Wall Street Trinity Church, the Culebra Cut in Panama, the Milan Cathedral in Italy, Canal in Amsterdam, harvesting wheat fields in Manitoba, Canada, and Blarney Castle. These were all in that box. So that was a real cheap way to get postcards. They weren't local postcards, but if you wanted something to send to one of your postcard trading pals, there you have it. Okay. Albuquerque grew a lot. I was fascinated by the fact that it was smaller than Santa Fe in 1890. And by the end of the period we're talking about, the population was about 15,000 people. Huge growth. And in those years, I found 29 postcard publishers. In those 20 years. And here they are from lecture 1, lecture 2, and this one that I've just finished. This includes 5 unknown publishers in the photographic category. So why were there so many? Well, I think one reason is the TB sanitariums we had here. The Lungers liked to send postcards and to have something to do. They would walk into town and buy postcards and write postcards to their friends away. Also, there was huge traffic on the railroad. There were as many as 16 passenger cars a day that came through Albuquerque. There were reports in the newspaper when conventioneers were heading to the West Coast for a convention. The postmaster would count the number of postcards that were sent out of the mailbox at the Alvarado. And there were sometimes as many as 2,000 postcards in one day that were sent from the Alvarado, so people were looking for things to send. There was also this issue of if you were a retailer, like these guys were, postcards let you distinguish your store from the other guy's store. So, that is the end of the 3rd lecture in this series. Thank you all very much. And thank the people who lent me stuff. Au revoir et merci.